When the empath finally sees the narcissist for who they are, something remarkable and terrifying occurs. It is as if a veil is torn away from the eyes of the soul, and what was once projected as light and salvation is revealed as a mask of hunger, a hollow mask carved by the psyche's deepest wounds for years, perhaps decades. So the empath has lived in the thrall of an image, seeing not the true other, but their own unconscious longing reflected back at them. The empath mistakes this reflection for destiny, for love, for meaning, and yet, all along, they were staring into a mirror of their own shadow, drawn to the figure of the narcissist, not because of who the narcissist is, but because of what within themselves remains unacknowledged, unredeemed, and starving. The drama between the empath and the narcissist is not merely a story of two people. It is a theater of archetypes enacted by the unconscious forces of humanity itself. The empath embodies the archetype of the wounded healer, the one who believes that their worth is secured by the saving of another. They offer themselves as sacrifice, as balm, as unending source of light, because deep within their psyche there lingers an ancient wound, the wound of abandonment, the wound of invisibility, the primal cry of the child who felt unseen and unloved. To heal this wound, the empath turns outward, pouring love like a libation upon those who cannot drink, giving endlessly to those who cannot truly receive. The narcissist appears as the perfect partner for this drama, for they embody the shadow of the empath's wound, where the empath yearns to give endlessly. The narcissist yearns to take endlessly, where the empath confuses self-sacrifice with love. The narcissist confuses possession with connection. And so they dance a cruel and hypnotic dance until the moment of revelation arrives. What happens when the empath finally sees the atmosphere shifts, the spell is broken, the archetypal mask is torn away, and the empath confronts both the truth of the narcissist and the truth of themselves. To see the narcissist for who they are is not merely to recognize their manipulation, their cruelty, or their hunger. It is to recognize the archetypal shadow that has lived within one's own psyche all along. For in every empath lies a hidden narcissist, and in every narcissist lies a hidden empath. They are not separate beings, but polarities of the same psychic field. The empath who prides themselves on selflessness may be secretly intoxicated by the identity of being needed, of being saintly, of being the light that others cannot live without. And the narcissist who prides themselves on power and charm may be secretly terrified of the emptiness within, yearning desperately for someone to see them as whole. When the empath sees the narcissist clearly, they are forced to confront the hidden truths that their bond was forged not by love, but by shadow, seeking shadow. This moment is painful because it dismantles illusions. It strips away the mythology the empath has lived by, perhaps for their entire life. To the empath, the narcissist often appears as the savior, so the one who will finally make them feel worthy by needing them beyond measure. But in truth, the narcissist does not see the empath at all. They see only a reflection of themselves, a vessel to absorb their projections, an altar upon which to feed their hunger. The empath is not loved, they are used. Yet the empaths cannot admit this, for to admit it is to awaken to their own collusion in the drama. They must confess, I was drawn to you because you mirrored my wound. I gave to you not out of pure love, but out of a desperate need to heal what lay unhealed within me. To see the narcissist clearly is to enter into shadow work of the most difficult kind. It is to withdraw one's projections and reclaim the psychic energy that was cast outward. The empath must gather back their light from the altar of the narcissist and hold it within themselves. Though it feels unbearably heavy, though it feels like a death, for it is a death, the death of illusion, the death of the false self that believed it existed only to serve, to save, to be consumed. In this death, something ancient is released. The empath begins to feel the stirrings of individuation, the birth of a self no longer bound by the archetype of the martyr. The narcissist, when revealed, is exposed as a figure of tragic emptiness. They are not the monster the empath once feared, nor the savior the empath once worshipped. They are a hollow figure, constructed from defenses, abandoned to the shadow, terrified of annihilation. Their hunger is the hunger of a child who was never mirrored, who was never held in the gaze of love, and who therefore learned to devour others as a means of survival. To see this does not excuse their cruelty, but it reveals its origin. It allows the empath to disentangle love from pity, compassion from sacrifice. The empath begins to see that to continue feeding this emptiness is not love but complicity. It is a collusion with the shadow to keep the wound open, to prevent transformation. The moment of seeing is often accompanied by dreams. Many who awaken from such relationships report dreams of masks falling away, of mirrors shattering, of being pursued by figures who once seemed alluring but are now revealed as grotesque. These dreams are the psyche's way of dramatizing the breaking of the spell. The unconscious speaks in symbols, and when the empath finally sees the narcissist, the unconscious floods with imagery of revelation. One dreamer told of walking through a cathedral filled with statues. One statue, radiant and golden, suddenly cracked open, revealing inside not light, but a swarm of insects devouring one another. She awoke in terror, yet with clarity the figure she had worshipped was hollow, and what lay inside was hunger, feeding on hunger. This is the dream of the empath awakening. It is the soul's announcement that the archetype has been exposed. The empath who awakens often feels rage at the narcissist for the manipulation, the gaslighting, the endless taking. But beneath this rage lies a deeper fury rage at the self for having participated, for having given away one's own soul in the name of love. This rage must not be denied, for it is sacred. It is the fire of the shadow, erupting to burn away illusion. Jung once said that the shadow, when integrated, becomes a source of strength. The empath must feel this rage, not as a weapon against the narcissist, but as a reclamation of power. It is the cry of the soul saying, no more. I am not your vessel. I am not your food. I am not your projection. I am, and so the empath begins the journey inward toward individuation. They withdraw the projections, reclaim the light, and face the shadow that made them susceptible to the narcissist's allure. They see that the desire to save others was born of a desire to be saved. They recognize that their endless giving was a mask for an inability to receive. They admit that their identity as healer was, in part, an escape from the terror of being broken. This recognition is not easy. It requires confession, humility, the willingness to see oneself not as pure victim, but as participant in a drama written by the unconscious. But in this recognition lies freedom. For when the empath sees, they awaken not only from the narcissist, but from their own shadow. The narcissist too is changed by this moment, though not always for the better. Some, when unmasked, become enraged, desperate to reassert control. Others collapse, unable to maintain the facade once the empath withdraws their energy. But a rare few may glimpse, for the first time, the emptiness within when the empath refuses to serve as mirror. The narcissist is forced to face their own face in the darkness. This is the beginning of their own potential healing, though many will flee from it, preferring the safety of illusion. Still, the possibility exists for the same shadow that binds the empath, binds the narcissist. They are mirrors of one another. And in the breaking of the mirror, both may find the chance for transformation. What happens when the empath finally sees the narcissist for who they are is, in truth, what happens when the soul finally sees itself? The drama dissolves. The archetypes are unmasked, and the individual begins to walk the path of wholeness. It is a lonely path, for the empath can no longer lose themselves in the illusion of saving another. They must now face the loneliness of their own soul, the silence of their own wounds, the terrifying freedom of being whole. But this is the path of individuation, the path toward the self, the path Jung called the most dangerous and the most necessary, for only when the empath sees can they cease to be merely an empath and become instead a full human being complex. Wounded, luminous, whole. When the empath steps back from the abyss and dares to look into it without flinching, they begin to discover that the face staring back was never only the narcissist's, but their own hidden countenance. The terror of this realization is that the enemy was not only outside, but within, that the same hunger, the same thirst for recognition, the same abyss of abandonment dwelt quietly in their own depths. To see the narcissist is to see oneself, and few experiences in life demand greater courage than this. The empaths who once prided themselves on purity must admit that their giving carried a secret demand, a subtle manipulation. Love me because I give, need me because I serve, I define me because I disappear for you. The narcissist, in the grotesque way, only amplified the very pattern the empaths had woven into their own soul. And so the revelation is double-edged, the other is unmasked. But so is the self. This confrontation awakens what I have called the shadow, The shadow is not evil in itself, though it often wears the mask of evil. It is everything the conscious ego refuses to acknowledge, everything too painful, too shameful, too terrifying to accept as part of the self. For the empath, the shadow may contain selfishness, rage, pride, and an insatiable hunger to be recognized, because these traits contradict the empath's conscious identity as giver, healer, and lover. They are repressed, but repression does not annihilate. What is buried lives on, and in the unconscious it seeks expression. The narcissist becomes the vessel through which these disowned qualities appear. The empath sees in the narcissist the selfishness they deny, the arrogance they repress, the hunger they disown. And so they are both horrified and fascinated, repelled and attracted. This is the strange magnetism of shadow. It draws us to what we most despise and most secretly are. The empaths may wonder why they tolerated so much, why they endured the endless cycles of cruelty and charm, abuse and reconciliation. The answer lies not in weakness but in projection. They were not seeing the narcissist as they truly were. They were seeing a projection of their own unconscious material, cloaked in the body of another. To awaken from this spell is to withdraw the projection and feel the unbearable weight of what has been denied. That is why it is so painful, so destabilizing. One does not merely lose a lover or a companion, one loses a piece of oneself, or rather, one retrieves it and must now integrate it. The empath must confess, I am not only healer but wounded, not only giver but needy, not only light but shadow. To carry this paradox consciously is the beginning of individuation. Individuation, that mysterious path by which the psyche becomes whole, is never smooth. It feels at first like madness, for the ego resists the dissolution of its cherished illusions. The empath, accustomed to feeling noble in self-sacrifice, now feels stripped of their sainthood. They must confront the possibility that their giving was not purely altruistic, but driven by unconscious compulsion. This realization may bring despair, even self-loathing, yet it is in this crucible that the gold is formed, to see oneself honestly, without masks, without self-deception, is the most difficult and the most necessary of tasks. Without it, one remains trapped in repetition, forever dancing with new narcissists, forever projecting the shadow outward. With it, one begins to claim the lost fragments of the soul, to walk toward wholeness. The narcissist, in this light, is revealed as both wounder and healer, destroyer and initiator. They are not only the abuser, but the dark teacher through their cruelty. They force the empath to awaken. Through their hunger, they expose the empath's illusions. Through their manipulation, they compel the empath to see the shadow. This does not excuse their behavior, nor does it require reconciliation, but it reframes the drama within the vast landscape of the psyche. Every figure who wounds us becomes, paradoxically, an agent of transformation. If we are willing to see, the narcissist plays the role of the trickster. the shadowed archetype who shatters illusions and destabilizes the ego so that deeper truths may emerge. In myth, the trickster is mischievous, often cruel, yet always transformative. The narcissist, when revealed, fulfills this archetypal function, even against their will. Many dreams accompany this stage of awakening. I recall a patient who dreamt of walking through a forest at night, pursued by a wolf with gleaming eyes. She fled in terror until suddenly she turned and faced the creature. To her astonishment, the wolf bowed its head, and as she looked closer, she saw that its eyes were her own. This dream marked a turning point in her healing. She realized that what she feared in the narcissist was her own shadow, and by facing it, she was no longer prey, but sovereign. Such dreams are not accidental. They are the psyche's way of announcing that projection has been withdrawn and shadow integrated. They are milestones on the path of individuation. The empath who sees clearly must now undergo initiation into a new life. They can no longer define themselves by saving others, nor can they find identity in being consumed. They must now learn the art of self-love, which is far more difficult than it sounds. Self-love is not indulgence or vanity. It is the capacity to see oneself in totality, light and shadow, wound and gift, and to embrace that wholeness without denial. It is to say, I am both healer and wounded, both giver and hungry, both radiant and flawed. In this acceptance lies freedom. No longer must one seek a narcissist to mirror the disowned qualities. No longer must one sacrifice the self to earn love. Love begins within, in the sacred marriage of opposites. Within the soul, this inner union is symbolized throughout mythology as the conjunctio, the alchemical marriage. The king and queen, sun and moon, masculine and feminine, unite in a mystical embrace, producing the philosopher's stone, the symbol of wholeness. For the empath, this means integrating the disowned shadow with the conscious identity, allowing selflessness and selfishness to coexist, allowing giving and receiving to flow together. The narcissist, who once embodied the disowned qualities, is no longer needed. The inner marriage has occurred, and the soul becomes whole. This does not happen overnight. It is a process of years, sometimes of decades, but the moment of revelation, the moment the empath sees the narcissist clearly, is the spark that ignites the alchemical fire. The journey is not without danger. Some empaths, upon awakening, swing to the opposite extreme. They embrace their shadow, but in distorted form, becoming hardened, cynical, even narcissistic themselves. They mistake integration for identification, believing that to claim one's selfishness is to worship it, that to reclaim one's rage is to unleash it indiscriminately. This is not individuation, but possession. The shadow, when not integrated, can possess the psyche, turning the wounded into wounders, the empath into narcissist. True individuation is subtler. It does not glorify the shadow, nor does it repress it. It holds the tension of opposites, allowing both to live in conscious balance The empath who learns this becomes not harder but wiser, not colder but more authentic. They no longer give compulsively, but when they give, it is free. They no longer tolerate cruelty, but when they love, it is true. The greatest gift of this awakening is freedom from repetition. Without integration, the empath repeats the same pattern endlessly, drawn to new narcissists with uncanny precision. It is as if the unconscious, desperate for healing, arranges fate to reenact the trauma until the lesson is learned. The faces change, but the drama is the same. When the empath finally sees, when they withdraw projection and integrate shadow, the repetition ceases. The pattern dissolves. The psyche no longer needs to stage the same play because the lesson has been learned. This is liberation, not only from one narcissist, but from the archetype itself. The empath steps out of the theater of compulsion and into the open field of choice, and yet liberation carries its own loneliness. To awaken from illusion is to stand alone, for illusions are what bind us to others in unconscious collusion. The empath may find that many relationships, once comfortable, now feel false. They may feel estranged from old companions who still live within the spell of projection. They may feel isolated, even abandoned, as if no one understands the depth of their revelation. This loneliness is not a mistake. It is the price of individuation. The soul, having left the false community of illusions, must wander in solitude until it finds true communion, not with masks, but with souls who are also whole. This wandering is the desert of individuation, the wilderness through which every seeker must pass. It is here that one encounters the self, the inner divine, the archetype of wholeness that transcends all opposites. To see the narcissist clearly is thus not the end but the beginning. It is the tearing of the veil, the shattering of the mirror, the death of illusion. What follows is the long journey of integration. So the alchemy of shadow and light, the slow birth of the self, it is a painful path, but it is sacred. For in the end, the empath discovers that the narcissist was never the true enemy, nor the true love. They were the mask through which the unconscious spoke, the dark angel sent to awaken the soul. And when the empath finally sees, they bow not to the narcissist, but to the mystery of the psyche, which in its infinite wisdom weaves even suffering into the tapestry of transformation. What is often not spoken of, but must be whispered here in the silence of our gathering, is the betrayal that pierces the empath's heart when the veil falls away. Betrayal is one of the most ancient initiations of the soul. It cuts not only through the relationship, but through the very structure of one's psychic world. The empath does not simply lose trust in the narcissist. They lose trust in the order of reality they believed in. They believed that giving would earn love, that sacrifice would yield security. That light would be met with light. When this proves false, the ground itself seems to tremble. This is why so many empaths, upon awakening, describe a feeling as if the earth has been pulled out from under their feet. They are cast adrift in a cosmos suddenly stripped of meaning And yet, paradoxically, this void is the birthplace of a deeper meaning, one not imposed from without, but discovered from within. Betrayal in myth is always the threshold of transformation. Judas betrays Christ, and through this wound, the archetype of resurrection is born. Loki betrays Balder. And through this tragedy, the gods glimpse the shadow that will one day consume their realm. In every culture, betrayal is the hand that opens the underworld, forcing the soul to descend. For the empath, the betrayal of the narcissist functions the same. It forces them downward into the shadow, into the labyrinth of the unconscious, where the treasures of the self are hidden. Without betrayal, the empath might have remained forever enchanted, forever imprisoned in illusions of saintly sacrifice. Through betrayal, they are thrust into the alchemical fire that burns away falsity and reveals essence. Dreams during this stage often become apocalyptic. One woman described a dream of standing in a great hall of mirrors, each reflecting a radiant image of herself smiling, nurturing, adorée. Suddenly, the mirrors cracked and shattered, revealing behind them a vast cavern filled with bones and serpents. She awoke trembling, yet something in her knew that this dream was not destruction, but revelation. The mirrors had been illusions, and the cavern, terrifying as it was, contained her truth. This is the psyche's language. It destroys the false world so that the deeper one may emerge. The empath must learn to interpret these inner apocalypses, not as endings, but as beginnings. The collapse of the old world is the birth of the true self. At this point, the empaths may feel tempted to numb themselves, to flee from the wound by rushing into new attachments, by drowning in work, by silencing the voice of the soul with distractions. But the psyche will not allow true healing through avoidance. The wound must be faced directly, endured consciously, lived through rather than escaped. Jung often spoke of the necessity of suffering, not as punishment, but as the crucible of transformation. The suffering of the empath is not meaningless. It is the heat that melts the rigid ego, softening it so that it may reshape into wholeness. Only those who dare to remain with the pain discover its hidden alchemy. Within the wound lies the medicine, but one must drink it without flinching. The narcissist often attempts to reassert their hold. When they sense the empath withdrawing, they may employ the familiar tactics of charm, pity, rage, or seduction, anything to re-establish the projection that fed them. This is the test of the empath's awakening. To succumb is to return to the cycle, to re-enter the labyrinth of illusion. To resist is to affirm one's emerging self, to declare, I will no longer betray myself to maintain this drama. Such resistance often feels like tearing away from gravity itself. For the archetypal bond is strong, but each act of resistance strengthens the soul like muscles tested by struggle. The empath learns that boundaries are not cruelty but clarity, not selfishness but selfhood. To say no to the narcissist is, at last, to say yes to oneself. It is here that the archetype of the warrior awakens within the empath. This may seem strange. For empaths, often see themselves as gentle, passive, endlessly accommodating, yet the true self is never one-sided. Within the gentle healer lies a fierce warrior, a guardian of the soul's integrity. When the empath integrates shadow, this warrior rises. They no longer confuse compassion with submission. They no longer mistake love for enslavement. They recognize that to protect their own light is not arrogance but necessity. In myth, the healer and the warrior are often siblings, two faces of the same archetypal pattern. The empath, having lived too long in the healer's guise, must now allow the warrior to stand beside them. This inner union ensures that compassion is balanced with strength, that love is guarded by discernment. The emergence of this warrior is often heralded in dreams as well. I recall a man who dreamt of tending a wounded child by a river. As he nursed the child, a lion approached, snarling. In the past, he would have fled, abandoning the child, but in the dream, he stood firm, and to his astonishment, the lion bowed before him. When he awoke, he wept, for he realized that the lion was his own rage. Once feared, now integrated, the dream revealed that he could be both healer and protector, both tender and fierce. Such is the gift awaiting the empath who endures betrayal and remains faithful to their own soul. The narcissist, seen clearly, loses their enchantment. They are revealed not as a god to be worshipped nor a demon to be feared, but as a wounded human, tragically lost in their own shadow. This recognition brings not pity but compassion, and compassion without entanglement. The empath no longer feels the compulsion to save, for they know that salvation cannot be forced upon one who denies their own wound. Compassion now flows freely, without the chains of compulsion, without the hidden demand to be loved in return. This is love in its mature form. Love that does not bind, but liberates. To arrive at such love is one of the highest achievements of the human soul. And yet, one must not underestimate the loneliness that follows. To awaken is to step out of the crowd, to leave behind the collective illusions that once provided comfort. The empaths may find themselves walking alone through a psychic wilderness, unsure of where to go or whom to trust. This wilderness is a necessary stage of individuation. One must leave the false village before one can find the true community. Jung called this the night sea journey, the descent into the depths where the treasures of the self are hidden. It is disorienting, sometimes terrifying, but it is also sacred. In the silence of this wilderness, the voice of the self begins to whisper, guiding the soul toward its destiny. The self does not shout, it does not manipulate like the narcissist, or seduce like the shadow. It speaks in symbols, in synchronicities, in the quiet unfolding of inner images. The empath, having suffered betrayal, is now more attuned to this subtle voice. They begin to notice patterns, a dream that repeats, a symbol that recurs in waking life, a chance encounter that feels fated. These are the whispers of the self. The compass of individuation, to follow them, requires faith, not in another, but in one's own psyche, one's own inner depths. This is the greatest reversal. The empath, who once placed all faith in the narcissist, now places faith in their own soul. And so the journey continues. The empath who has seen cannot return to blindness. They may stumble, they may falter. They may even fall into old patterns for a time. But the vision cannot be erased. Once the narcissist is seen for who they are, the illusion is broken forever. This is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying, because the comfort of illusion is gone. Liberating, because the truth, however painful, is the only soil in which wholeness can grow. The empath stands now at the threshold of a new life, one not defined by giving or taking, not enslaved by archetypal compulsion, but guided by the quiet, inexhaustible flame of the self. And so we arrive at the final stage of this drama, where the empath who once saw only through projection now beholds reality with unveiled eyes. This stage is not without grief. To awaken from illusion is to grieve what never truly existed. The empath must mourn the fantasy of a love that would finally heal them. The dream of being endlessly needed, the myth that their sacrifice would buy immortality in another's heart. These dreams, though illusions, were real in their psychic power. To let them die is to feel as though a part of the soul itself is dying. And in a sense, it is the false self that lived through these dreams withers in the fire of truth. But beyond this grief lies something vaster, something more radiant, the birth of a self no longer bound by compulsion, no longer enslaved by archetypal enchantments, no longer chained to the endless cycle of giver and taker. In this final unveiling, the empath begins to sense the self as a presence, not as an idea. The self, that archetype of wholeness, of divine totality within, emerges like a subtle light in the darkness. It does not speak in the language of demands, as the narcissist did, nor in the frantic cries of the wounded child. It speaks in silence, in images, in the stillness of dreams and synchronicities. The empath may dream of circles, mandalas, or radiant figures of integration. They may feel an uncanny peace even in solitude, a peace that arises not from the approval of another, but from alignment with their own depths. This is the self, the center that was there all along, waiting for the illusions to collapse, so it might be revealed. But this birth of the self does not erase the past. The empath carries scars, psychic imprints of what they endured. Yet these scars are not signs of failure. They are hieroglyphs carved into the soul, symbols of an initiation survived, just as the shaman in ancient cultures was wounded before becoming healer. So too, the empath's suffering becomes the source of wisdom. They now know the patterns of shadow, the lure of projection, the hunger of the unhealed. They can recognize it not only in themselves, but in others. This knowledge is not to be wielded with superiority, but with humility. For the moment one believes oneself immune to shadow, shadow has already returned. The scars remind the empath of their humanity, of their vulnerability, and of the need for perpetual vigilance against illusion. The final reconciliation is with love itself. For the empath who has lived in the shadow of narcissism, love has been tangled with control, sacrifice, hunger, and illusion. To disentangle love from these distortions is perhaps the greatest task of all. Love, in its truest form, is not about losing oneself in another, nor about consuming the other for one's survival. It is about seeing clearly and still choosing connection. It is about recognizing the other as a soul with light and shadow, as one is oneself, and meeting them in authenticity rather than fantasy. This kind of love is rare, for it demands that both partners confront their shadows and relinquish illusions. But it is the only love that nourishes rather than devours. To arrive at such love, the empath must first have walked the path of betrayal, shadow, and individuation. Only then are they capable of a love that is free. Many resist this truth, clinging instead to the hope that the narcissist can be healed through their sacrifice. But this is not love. It is compulsion. True love does not force, does not save, does not bind. It liberates, and sometimes the most loving act is to walk away, to release both oneself and the other from the chains of illusion. This is not cruelty, but compassion in its highest form. The empath who learns this lesson steps into maturity, into the dignity of the self. They cease to be defined by what they give or by what they endure. They begin to live as whole beings, capable of love that is neither self-erasure nor domination. In mythological terms, this journey mirrors the descent and return of the hero. The empath descends into the underworld of betrayal, faces the shadow embodied in the narcissist, dies to illusion, and rises reborn, like Inanna descending into the underworld, stripped of her garments and power, only to return, transformed, like Orpheus descending for Eurydice, learning the devastating cost of looking back, like Christ descending into death and rising renewed. These myths are not distant stories. They are living dramas of the psyche, enacted in the lives of those who dare to face their own unconscious. The empath, through their suffering, joins this lineage of heroes, not in the external sense of conquering enemies, but in the inner sense of integrating shadow and awakening to the self. The empath's final task is to re-enter the world without falling back into illusion. Individuation is not a retreat from life, but a deeper immersion in it. Now, guided by awareness rather than compulsion, the empath learns to discern between projection and reality, between shadow and substance. They learn to love without losing themselves, to give without erasing, to stand firm without hardening. They walk among others not as saviors or victims, but as whole human beings, luminous with the strange authority that comes from having passed through fire. This authority is not domination, but presence. Others feel it without words. Here is someone who has seen the abyss and returned with light. And yet, this journey never truly ends. Individuation is not a destination, but a lifelong unfolding. The empath will face new shadows, new temptations, new illusion. But once one has seen, one cannot entirely forget. the memory of betrayal, the wisdom of shadow, the presence of the self, these remain as guiding stars. The empath may stumble, but they will rise more quickly. They may grieve, but they will despair less deeply. They may love, but with eyes open rather than closed. This is the quiet miracle of individuation. It does not erase our humanity, but it deepens it, enriches it, makes it luminous. So I say to you who have walked with me through this long meditation, do not fear the moment of revelation. Do not fear the pain of seeing the narcissists for who they are. It is not the end of your story, but its true beginning. What you lose in illusion, you gain in authenticity. What dies in projection is reborn in self. And though the path is lonely, though it leads through shadow and betrayal, it is the path of wholeness, the path the soul has always sought. To see clearly is to awaken. To awaken is to become whole. And to become whole is, at last, to know love in its truest, most radiant form. This is what happens when the empath finally sees the narcissist for who they are. The mask shatters, the shadow emerges, the soul descends, and from the fire of betrayal rises a being more real, more whole, more luminous than before. This is the alchemy of the psyche, the eternal mystery by which suffering becomes transformation, illusion becomes wisdom, and the wound becomes the place where the light enters.